Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
So to recap where we are and introduce our guest teacher today. So we've been talking about theology, elements of trying to construct an idea about God that we bring into our davening. And we've been talking about, we did biblical and rabbinic, and now we're in medieval. We talked for 2 weeks about Maimonides, Rambam, his ideas about God, as we read chapter 1 of his principles of the foundations of the Torah, which talks about God's nature, God being outside of space, outside of time, singular and unitary in the way that nothing else is singular and unitary, unchanging. And then we looked at Yigdal as a prayer that expressed in poetic form some of these ideas. We looked at Adon Olam, which I realized afterwards I was struck by the amazingness of Adon Olam, in the sense that the first part of Adon Olam is, I think, essentially Maimonides' ideas about God, and then the latter part of Adon Olam connects that to the God of the Psalms, right, and the prophets. Yet God is my rock, I rely on God, and God takes care of me. This amazing juxtaposition of the God outside of space and time, but that's the God who takes care of me. So we had some questions about Rambam that came up. So we've invited our Temple Beth Am Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Joel Rembaum, to come join us this week. We'll see if we finish up this week or if we need to linger into next week and can ask him to come back again. We'll see. But some questions came up, Rabbi Rembaum, such as, okay, if God is outside space and time and unchanging, according to Rambam, according to Maimonides, then why do we pray? I'm gonna amplify that question a little bit. Why do we pray? How do we actually relate to an entity that is unchangeable, fundamentally unlike anything else in the world, does not have feelings, and is outside of space and time? Obviously very different than the idea in, let's say, the prophets, where we read some of Heschel, who talks about how God has feelings, right? We have we do actions, God has feelings, they're kind of reciprocal. We affect the way God reacts. And Rambam would seem to be suggesting that the way we, I will say, relate to God is very, very different than that. So you can jump in wherever you are. Please remember that there's a class for Siddur. So I always want to bring you back to, okay, so what does that mean for prayer? Even though not everything you say is about prayer in particular. So take it away, Rabbi Rembaum.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Dr. Havivi. I call him my Rambam because he is a rabbi and a doctor.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Like Rambam was. I call him Maimonides. So thank you, Maimonides. Yes, so you read the first chapter. I just want to comment on a few things, a few basic principles that are established in that chapter, because then you'll appreciate when we start talking about prayer how significant it is. So first of all, I don't know if you focused on this, but in the very first chapter through paragraphs 1 through 7, Rambam already sets down 3 commandments. Because remember, this is a law code that you were looking at. And of course, it begins with philosophy, but embedded within that are 3 commandments. Okay, the first one is a positive commandment that there is God. Okay, and that he takes that from the beginning of the 10 Commandments. Anochi Adonai Elohecha.
Very timely, since we just read that in Shul this past Shabbos.
Yes. Secondly, he says, there shall be no other gods, right? It's negative. That's what we call a negative commandment. No other gods. And that he takes from, again, the 10 Commandments. Lo yulach Elohim acherim, right? You shall have no other gods. And finally, he sets down the principle that there's only one God, right? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So you got 2 positive commandments and 1 negative right there at the very beginning. So basically, he begins his law code with philosophy. And that whole chapter is philosophy in a language that the common folk, quote unquote, can understand. All right. And so I think you have to understand that prayer needs to be understood within Rambam as it relates to philosophy. And this is the challenge, because he has begun by setting forth a concept of God, as you rightfully said, that appears to be very remote. But what emerges from all of this, and we'll get into it in greater detail, is the notion that the relationship for Rambam that a human being creates to God, which is a relationship of love, which is another mitzvah, be'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. That's a commandment to love God. So it's an expression that expresses our love of God. Okay, but here's the thing: you've got to understand that Rambam's system, and by the way, that it is supposed to be a powerful, life-changing experience. But the experience of having love with God is an intellectual one for Rambam. It's not mystical. It is totally intellect. And that's what's strange, and that's what puts people off, if you will. And it is suggested by scholars that the Kabbalah developed and blossomed and the Zohar was written as a response to Rambam, saying, no, God is infinitely more accessible. Okay, but Rambam believes that you have got to create a foundation of philosophy that can be shared by everybody. He wants everybody to be a philosopher. And that's the whole point. Think about this. Think about the Mishnah Torah. It's written in Hebrew. What are all of his other, except for some of his responsa? Everything else is basically Arabic. Why did he write this in Hebrew? Anybody have an answer?
In simple, clear Hebrew.
Yeah, exactly.
So that people could read it.
Right. What people? People beyond the realm of Arabic-speaking countries. This was supposed to be a universal law code, right? That every Jew, and if you read the introduction to it, he's dealing with a universal problem in Jewish law. And so he writes it in Hebrew so everybody can have it. Simple, folks. And he begins, and for him, it is necessary in order to maintain a relationship with God to have a philosophical background. So by putting this all at the beginning, basically the book begins, it doesn't begin Breshit bara Elohim, right? In fact, the whole concept of creation doesn't appear until the second chapter of Yehilchot Yesodei Torah. It's not a primary thing. Everything here based upon principles of Aristotelian philosophy.
Could you say in
I'm getting
a paragraph what those principles of Aristotelian philosophy are?
I can't say it in a paragraph.
You can't say it in a paragraph. All right. Well,
say it in a few paragraphs.
Paragraphs, if you could try. Yeah.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Aristotelian philosophy teaches God is an unmoved mover, right? He doesn't change.
I'm sorry. I just want to.
Wait.
No, I know it's a slogan. I just want to say it again more slowly. God is an unmoved mover. Right.
Right. So things that we do don't move God, don't change God, don't affect God's emotions. Right? God's beyond all that. In fact, if you think about comparing Aristotelian philosophy and prayer, again, I got to mention this because prayer fits into this whole process. If you consider this, Aristotelian philosophy is a bottom-up process. The whole process of the universe is bottom-up. What does that mean? That the lowest level of the created world, which is us, the earth, right? We are moved. Our whole process of action, of thought, everything relates to our intellect's desire to be like an intellect that is higher than ours. That's called the active intellect. It's a force. It's like the soul of the earth. All of creation is body and soul. Soul meaning an impetus to move within us. We move. All right, so we start here, and the whole universe is a series of moving upward layers of intellect that get more intense, more God-like, but never reaching God until you get to the sphere, which is mentioned here, that God causes the sphere to spin. What's the sphere? The universe for an Aristotelian is a series of spheres. This is not the sephirot of the Zohar. A sephirah in the Zohar means a number with a mystical meaning to it. This is a sphere. All right, a sphere has matter, an invisible matter, the fifth element, and a soul, an intellect. And each intellect, each lower intellect, strives to achieve the level of the next one, because intellect wants more and more and more and more intellectual activity to satisfy it. So everybody wants to be like the one above, all right? But nobody can achieve that, but we try. And we're at the bottom. By the way, that is humbling. Rambam makes it clear. Who was the greatest mind, the greatest prophet, the greatest person ever to live?
Moses.
What was one of his most prominent attributes?
Humble.
Humility. All right, so we're supposed to be like Moses. We imitate Moses. We imitate God to the best of our ability. Anyway, so that process of the activity of intellects causes motion, causes life. All right, so you have body and matter. Well, I'm sorry, matter and spirit in all of these different levels until you come to the unmoved mover. God is strictly what? Intellect. Pure intellect, like nothing else.
I don't want to derail this, but I just have a question. For Rambam, is soul and intellect the same thing? Does he say soul is fundamentally an intellectual
I would say,
thing?
yes. In other words,
Close enough. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
The part of us that is abstract and not physical.
In the sense that is the force that vivifies life.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So it's essential. All right. But God is pure intellect, and no entity below God can comprehend God fully, let alone us.
If I can just restate that, my understanding of it is because we are intellect infused into matter, we are not capable of grasping what would actually be intellect that did not have matter as
That is correct. Very good.
We can't fathom it. Okay.
No, impossible. And can none of the other levels of existence. So you see how far away we are, but we strive. All right, Alan.
What levels of existence are there between us as humans and God?
All right, very quickly, I'm not going to go through them all, but you have the active intellect, the moon, the planets, the stars at different levels, and finally the top one is the one that he refers to here at the beginning of the Mishnah Torah, which is the sphere the action of which energizes all the lower ones by virtue of their trying to become like that. Right? The sphere moves, the sphere's activity. The level below it, let's say the planets or the stars, they want to become like the sphere, the big sphere. So that generates their actions. Below them is the moon. The moon wants to become like the stars. That generates their action, et cetera, et cetera. Got it?
Where are the angels? Where are the angels? Because he mentions the Malach.
The angels are not part of this structure. The angels are higher level, totally spiritual creatures that nonetheless can take on forms, but they are transient, and their basic existence is totally spiritual.
They're above the moon.
Oh, well above.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a bit confused, because I know Rambam has 10 different words to describe angels. Srafim, Ophanim, that whatever you're going to have. And yet you're saying that they are separate and apart from anything else. I mean, do they wind up praising God? Is
yes,
that
of course.
the spiritual component? Okay.
Yes, they're all part of the same process.
Yes, but we as humans are supposed to be lower than all these things, but yet I'm just confused that somehow the planets or the stars would somehow be on a higher level than us as human beings.
Well, they are. That's what he says. In other words, because it's based upon this concept of the gradations of the universe, okay, and the nature of the movement and the nature of the look. They didn't know they knew that stars and planets were different because they had different motions.
Right,
For them, they had quite a sophisticated astronomy. I don't want to go into that.
Yeah, but intuitively
Alan,
they grasp.
Wait. Hold on. Wait a second.
Sorry.
Alan, you're moving into another area that really, we got to let go of that because we want to get back down to prayer.
I've let go of it.
Okay, thank you. All right. Now, moving on. So that's basically how the Aristotelian system, the astronomical way in which this whole process is. So now, what is the...
I'm sorry, I have one question. I have to interrupt. I have one question. It can be a short answer. So did Aristotle say some version of this God, the unmoved mover, even though the ancient Greeks were pagans and believed in the gods?
Yes. Oh, he was not a polytheist at all.
Thank you.
A monotheist in that same respect. But again, his God, and his God is the God that I mentioned. He's the unmoved mover. That's it. The first cause, meaning all action, all life, everything, matter as. But see, Aristotle doesn't believe in creation. For Aristotle, the world was eternal. Okay, it was eternal. And Rambam struggles with that. That's another subject. But the fact is, I happen to think that because he was a rabbi and because he still has this profound faith in the meaning of Torah, because as you see here, in all of these instances in chapter 1, there's always a pasuk, some verse from the Torah, to which he hooks things on. And basically what he's trying to get the reader to understand is you want to get to God, you want to understand God, then you need to have a philosophical understanding of how the Torah operates. He doesn't want to separate them because they're both from the same source, God. Okay? Because the Torah is a powerfully intellectual document. You just have to understand how to understand its language. Its language is metaphoric. It's symbolic. Right? Because we are humans. We need these things to help us comprehend. All right? So that's basically, you've got to understand Torah properly, and that's philosophy. They go hand in hand. So now, that is the highest level of worship of God. The highest level. Philosophical, what he calls metaphysical speculation, where you have studied, you have read, you're in a quiet place, you meditate on that, you go deep into it, and at a certain point, bingo, you have this flash, this experience, and you know, I have had a contact with the divine. And that fills you with with immense joy, love, appreciation, and so forth and so on. That's what he believes. I understand that maybe you guys have had that kind of an experience. I can tell you when I would do, even now when I teach Psalms, all right, and I have a revelation, right, an insight that I look to see, does anybody have this? And nobody seems to have it. There may be somebody out there who does. I just didn't find it. Okay. I get all excited. You can hear me right now. All right. I get all excited. I say, my God, look at this. This is unbelievable. And I feel as if, I mean, I don't get as theological as Rambam does at that moment, of course, but I can understand where he's coming from as a philosopher, because he had to have, when he put his philosophy together, lots of these moments, because he was doing some very creative stuff, radically creative stuff. And he knew it. Okay. But the point was, he assumed that every human being can have that experience. And he assumed that human beings seek out that kind of aha moment, which for him is a theological step to pick up these sparks of the divine that we can access. And he says that, they are fleeting moments. We can access it, though, and that is as close to God as we can get.
And it's interesting that although it's an appreciation of, on an intellectual level, that it does then spark in the individual an affective or emotional response. Meaning it is joyful when you feel you somehow come closer to apprehending God as intellect.
Yes, it is, for him, it's supposed to be a moment of unbound joy and love. And then you get the sense, I am connected. But again, the point is, it's dependent upon a whole subsystem that prepares the human for that experience. And prayer is the next level. Below a metaphysical speculation, you have prayer. And for him, the whole purpose of prayer is, if you will, to create a kind of a liturgical foundation for jumping up to the next level of intellectual speculation. It's a sine qua non. You can't do that unless you allow the prayer to do its job. Now, what is the purpose of prayer, according to what he says? The purpose of prayer is to help make us, number one, you cannot pray satisfactorily if you simply mouth the words or even sing the words. You've got to be able to focus on the meaning, comprehend the principle that's there. And by the way, you can pray in any language. Rambam says that clearly, not here, but elsewhere. Prayer can be done in any language. Hebrew, of course, is the best because it is the closest to expressing the true meaning of what God is. But you can pray in Russian, pray in Farsi, pray in Arabic, you can pray in anything. All right? He says that very, very clearly. Okay, so but we do Hebrew. All right, so therefore it's almost incumbent upon us that those of us who don't understand Hebrew so well have a good translation. I mean, a good translation. And I think, just as an aside, of all of the English translations that the conservative movement has produced, I think the latest one in the Lev Shalem series happens to be the best, because it has done something that the other prayer books did not, which is hew more closely to the literal meaning of the Hebrew, and to have notes on the side to help explain that. That's very important. I always told people, read the comments, both in the Chumash, in the Siddur, once we got them. All right? And it's critical, but you have to understand what they are saying. And the point that Rambam is making here, when he gets into dealing with the second major book, or just to show you the priorities here, in the Mishnah Torah, in the entire law code. So the first is Sefer Hamadah, the book of knowledge, because that's the highest level. What's the second major book? Sefer Ahava, love. And what is the first part of that? The laws of the Shema and the Amidah, prayer. So prayer in the structure of the law code is the second level. And prayer must be done because what it does is it focuses us on different areas of the reality in which we encounter God. So let's talk for a moment. The laws of the Shema, right? So he'll go and talk about, the structuring of, you can read it, the structuring and so forth and so on. And the whole point of that is to make us aware of the fact that you have in the Shema and its blessings a profound structure that moves you from the concept of creator, which is universal, to the concept of love and Torah, ahava rabbah, with great love, and the unique relationship that gives the Jewish people to God. We have this great gift called Torah, right? And then it focuses on that basic principle. There is one God who's responsible for everything that has come before. Creation of the universe, giving of Torah and choice of the people, and then there's God. But I don't think Rambam mentions this, but my little midrash, and because I really appreciate what he's trying to do. But basically, if you think about it, when you think about the Ahava Rabbah prayer, which immediately precedes the Shema, and then the Shema, and then the Ahavta, you shall love the Lord your God, that is a structure. It begins by saying, you have shown us great love by giving us Torah, God. Thank you. And you've told us to proclaim your oneness. That's what it says. Liachedcha be'ahava, to proclaim your oneness out of love. That's the Ahava Rabbah. And then you say, who chooses Israel out of love for that purpose. So then what do? We proclaim it. Shema Yisrael, right? And we spend a lot of time on it. We focus on it. That focused time is exactly what Rambam wants. I mean, he would rather you do it more quietly, to be sure. But the whole notion of focusing on that. And by the way, if you read the Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch says the Shema is the only one where you actually have to make sure that you say and pronounce each word correctly, because it is the foundational element. And that's coming from a more of a mystical perspective, to be sure. But Rambam wouldn't disagree with that, I don't think. All right, anyway. So basically it's a covenant. God loves us, gives us Torah, and says, proclaim the oneness. We proclaim the oneness, and then it says, you love God back. And the parental motif is in both, right? Avinu ha'av ha'rachaman, our God, the great compassionate father, parent, right? Vishinantam levanecha, and you in the Ahavta, teach them diligently to your children. You now become the parent and teach it to your children. And then finally, you move on to the most, shall we say, for Rambam even powerful conclusion, which is Geula, which is the ultimate moving toward the Messianic era. All right, and I happen to be, there are scholars who say Rambam really wasn't such a Messianist. I don't think that is correct. I agree with those who say he definitely believed in Mashiach Zeit, in the time of the Messiah, and a Messiah. All right, there's an argument. He wrote a book called, the book on a letter. It's a long, one of his famous igrot, one of his great long letters, which are mini books on the Messianic era and the Messiah. And the point is, it's clear. He even says that his father told him the date when the Mashiach is coming. Rambam said that. Well, unfortunately, he died before that happened, so he didn't know that it was wrong. But okay, it saved him that pain. All right, anyhow. All right. So for him, that's critical, because that's the ideal. Because once that happens, there is, he believes Ein Bein Yemot HaMashiach. It's a statement from the Gemara, right? One of the great rabbis says there's no difference between the Messianic era and here, except for what was it? Oh darn, I can't figure. There's one difference. It's not. Sorry, I didn't check it up. It just hit me just now, and I haven't had a chance to check up the end of that statement. But basically, there's not much difference between the two. Okay, and that if you read his letter, you'll see that. Anyway, so the point is that whole structure is a foundation. Think about it now, for our belief in God, and it sensitizes us to the spiritual power that exists within our tradition. because standing at the core there is the Torah. So remember, he wants us to have a philosophical understanding of Torah. That prayer, that whole structure is intended to open us up to the meaning of that and to inspire us as our goal in life to understand that Torah, to proclaim God's oneness in the world, and then to use that as a process that can get us to those moments when we can actually make contact in flashes with the divine intellect, which we will never know. Avi.
Why do we have 13 paragraphs asking God for things in the middle of the Amidah?
My next point. But Avi Havivi, I'm sorry, Alan Brady.
Well, I was following that along, and one of those 13 is God is Shomea Tefillah. How is that possible with a...
All right, fine. Remember, that's metaphoric. Remember, according to Rambam, Ezra and his Beit Din were the ones who formulated the Amidah. They were still under the influence of prophecy. So this is a kosher midrash, if you will. All right, the structure of prayer that Ezra and his Beit Din created, and he realizes they didn't create all the wording, but the basic structure there is he says he counts it to them, the 18. All right. So that's the next thing. The 13 blessings of the Amidah, of the weekday Amidah, the middle 13. Remember, everybody, the first 3 and the last 3 of the Amidah, of all the Amidahs we say throughout the year, with some minor shifts, remain the same. Right? Is that a given? You all understand that. They stay the same. There are adjustments made on the high holidays, for example. Okay? All right. The middle ones of the weekday Amidah fall out on Shabbat and festivals because those are days when you're not supposed to petition God, because you're supposed to feel as if you are in the realm where there's no need to petition, and focus on the joy and the spiritual meaning of those special days and the specialness of your relationship with God. Shabbat and Chagim are supposed to be days when you feel especially close to God, right? It's the same thing like the Raza de Shabbat from the section from the Zohar that is in our prayer book right before you say Baruch Hu, that talks about how the fact that powerful unification takes place when we start saying Mariv on Erev Shabbat. When we, the people, say it, boom, things are happening up there as they are down here. Day of unification, of love, contemplation. And there's one other word which goes back to the 13. Appreciation. Appreciation. And what counts? All right, so now if you work your way through all those 13 supplications, including that God hears prayer, okay, God hears prayer. That's a metaphor. The whole point is if you can understand and think about the meaning. So how does it, just as an example, and it fits right into Rambam's system. It's beautiful. The first prayer of the intermediate is what? Chonein Hadat. God begins with what?
Knowledge.
Where does the Mishnah Torah begin with? Wisdom. Right there. So Rambam is saying, oh, this is so amazing what these guys did. Begins with philosophy. Right there, the first of these, a prayer you you thank God for giving us the capacity to intellectualize.
So I'm gonna push you, and I want to try to wrap it up by 9. So why am I asking God to heal someone who is sick if I can't change God's mind in air quotes?
That is by focusing on that process. What you learn it's part of a holistic approach. When you do all of these things, you come to an understanding of how the world operates. If you come to an understanding of how the world operates, you can better adjust your own life and fix things in your own life. Now, at a certain point, he says what's called hashgacha pratit, which is what we're talking about. which is divine providence, where God is listening, is looking over the well-being of each one of us. Okay, he says, listen, guys, it's in the Torah. It's the word of God. Therefore, it has to be true. But I'll be darned if I can understand how that operates. Ask me the mechanics of it, because I'll never know, and neither will you.
He says that, some version of that.
Rambam says that.
Got it.
In the Moreh Nevuchim, in the philosophy book. Okay, and that's his approach. But that's framed with a concept, though, that if you do your job right with appreciating prayer and get into the deeper meanings of all of these things, then you will come to an understanding of how it is that we can ask God to heal. Ultimately, he says, we have got to be part of the process of this providential care. We have got to be at this end of the receiving end, so to speak. There's an overflowing in the universe of understanding of these things. It's our responsibility as intellectual creatures to be able to understand how that works. And the more we understand about it, the better we are in managing that. And he says there is no inherent evil in the universe. Evil comes from people who screw up, pardon my French, who don't follow the system, who break with it, who can't comprehend, who refuse to comprehend it properly. And he doesn't assume everybody's a Moses. We're not. We can't be like Moses. His intellect is at a different level altogether. That's Rambam. Okay, but we have a basic level. If we operate within our basic level, Rambam seems to be saying in the Mishneh Torah, if we all follow our basic intellect and work to the best of our ability to understand how the universe operates, we can become the partners in this process of healing illness. Before we conclude, one year some of you have heard me say this, I gave a drush on the high holidays. We had a whole rash of deaths for younger people that summer. It was bothering the congregation. I had to respond. So as part of this, I made a comparison. I went online, went to the U.S. government and budget. And you can get this every year. You can get all the same kind of information. How much money was spent this year on defense that particular year? 2000 and something. 700 billion. How much money was spent on medical research, private and public? 120 billion. I cornered two doctors who were members of the shul before I gave the drash. And I said, do you think that if those numbers were reversed, that we would be more advanced in our medical understanding and control of disease? He said, what a stupid question. Of course they would be. If we spend $700 billion on medical research and only $120 billion on defense, it would all be different. All right? Now, defense, this was not a matter of politics or anything. We did it because we feel threatened, so we had to defend ourselves. And the whole world operates that way. So this is not just the United States. It's a humankind problem. We spend more money making war than we do healing people. And that's part of the problem. So in a sense, Rambam was right. We've got to become partners in the process. Anyhow, tefillah, prayer, is supposed, and Dafka the Amidah is supposed to pinpoint all kinds of various parts of our experience on an ongoing basis that we need to be sensitive to. And the truth of the matter is, if you look at it properly, and some of you have heard me say this in some classes, the Amidah is actually a blueprint leading to the Messianic era. Go through each step. It begins with personal things. It goes to national things. And then it talks about the rebuilding of Zion and the reestablishment. It ends up with the Davidic kingdom. That's Mashiach. This is the blueprint for Messianic salvation. But in the process, it leads us to think about all kinds of significant elements of activity that we have got to be sensitive to, knowledgeable about, know what the Torah says, make all those things part of our life? So I would suggest for people who ask that question, that's part of the answer. A lot of it depends on us. Now, I am not saying that you should all believe in Maimonides' approach. I love studying it. I find a lot of wisdom in it, as you hear. I'm not a Maimonidean. Okay, I agree with my personal approaches. I agree with what both Rambam and the Zohar say about God. Believe it or not, they say the exact same thing at the end of the day. You can't understand God. So people tell me, do you believe in God? I say, absolutely. What kind of God do you believe in? I don't know. I'm a sacred agnostic. I believe in God, but I'll be darned if I know what that means. I have a vague idea, which I get from the way the world operates, how the universe operates, and how screwed up people can be. I got that. But I don't know. I agree with both Rambam and the Zohar. I'm a little tiny nothing in this universe. It's chutzpah of me to say, oh, I know God. Impossible. It's troubling sometimes, yeah. But that's the reality. So I do my best. And I believe that if I do my best, whatever it means, God's happy. So, Davin.
So I want to thank you. I want to summarize and tell me if I have it sort of right, that for Rambam, prayer is, if I could boil it down, to help us appreciate God more and get closer to God by understanding God's better, and to change us.
Yes. But I would say something else. It is a necessary step, not just a step. It is the necessary step to get to the next level. It's sort of an intellectual connection to God. It is a necessary exercise to get us to that level. And that's why in the Mishneh Torah, it is the number 2 book.
Rabbi Rembaum, thank you very much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure.
And helping us sort out a lot of these things.
There's a lot of stuff I never got to, but that's okay.
Okay, good. Thank you. Do you want another session to get to more stuff, or this is okay?
It's up to you.
Okay.
I mean, we can go to details, but I mean, I don't want to impede. You think about it.
I'll talk to you during the week, and we'll see what the details.
I don't know if the people.
My vote is to have another lesson.
I'd like to have another.
Mine too. I agree with that.
I would be interested for you to take it a step more specific, like how this thinking impacts on certain specific prayers, since we're a morning minyan group.
Oh, okay. That'd be great.
Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, sure. Next time? Wait, let me check my
next
schedule.
week. Same time next week, if we could. Meaning, you talked about creation, Ava Rabbah, and Ve'ahavta.
Yeah.
If you could focus on a few more prayers, how looking at them through a Maimonidean lens helps us appreciate them more deeply. That would be great.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.